Hi, welcome everyone to this session, which will be featured as an asynchronous session within the AHEAD 2021 conference in Dublin, entitled Reconnection, Placing Inclusion at the Heart of Online Learning and Support. It's also in a stream which is called a deeper dive. So you will be watching this session asynchronously, and I'm recording it early in March. But I will try and make it as interactive as possible. The topic for today is From the Trenches, a phenomenological exploration of an instructor's journey to reflect on learner engagement through the lens of inclusion within the abrupt COVID pivot of two higher education courses to online delivery. I could probably have worked harder to make that title shorter, but it was really to try and convey as much as information as possible about what the session is about. So objectives for today, it's examine the details of how myself as the author and instructor pivoted two courses to online delivery during the COVID-19 pandemic, and to accompany me on a phenomenological reflection as to what constitutes learner engagement. That's what I'm going to focus on mostly the engagement piece. Obviously, we could do a lot of UDL work on all aspects of the pivot of courses that were face-to-face onto online. But in this session, I was interested, particularly since we only have 25 minutes, particularly at looking at the issue of engagement and seeing how UDL could be useful for that exploration, that analysis. And then I will explore more specifically and in detail the use of UDL in my reflection, and particularly the multiple means of engagement principle. And then to wrap up, I will try and conceptualize the observations made and sort of draw wider, broader lessons as to the extent to which UDL and COVID have been useful in shifting mindsets within higher education about learner engagement. Format of the session, as I've explained, this is an asynchronous session recorded several weeks before you will get to see during the conference. It's not easy to model UDL within an asynchronous session, but I will try and do a few things. So despite these limitations, try and still inject a little bit of UDL flavor within the session itself. So on the day when it's aired in the conference, I will use the Twitter hashtag for the conference to engage with you as participants. So if you have questions, don't hesitate. I will certainly keep an eye on the hashtag and keep interacting with you through the conference hashtag on Twitter. You will see that I will also happy to engage with you through the hashtag before, during, and after the conference if you have any questions about this reflection on learner engagement during the COVID pivot. And also you will see that I've integrated a couple of interludes. Now obviously they are called interactive interludes. I can't hope to engage with you during that time, but what I would encourage you to do is, although the recording is 25 minutes, to pause your recording and take part in the activities which I suggest, which will stretch the session to a little bit longer, but also means that you will be switching roles, which will probably break the monotony of hearing someone speak for 25 minutes. So I really do engage you to use the pause button and actually spend some time sort of carrying out the activities which I suggest, and I'll be part of the UDL format. So let me tell you a little bit about the context of this study. Obviously the COVID-19 pivot has been difficult for all instructors. And a lot of instructors in most jurisdictions, most institutions have had to switch almost overnight to an online delivery, and that's been very stressful for many people. So nothing new about that. But this example goes beyond just the anecdotal run-of-the-mill experience that most people have had. So the experience I'm talking to you about is I am head of an MA program. And as part of that MA program, we have two courses which normally start in the summer. The MA is actually delivered online, so there wasn't that much that was different for the rest of the program. But the two first courses were extremely important for the structure of the program, because one course, which is called Leading for Social Justice, it's really a course in critical pedagogy, is always been designed to be offered not only synchronously face-to-face, but it's also an intensive course which is offered in 2 weeks. So the course is still 8 weeks long nominally, but really the students are only doing intro for 3 weeks, and then they're with us for an intensive 2 weeks where all of the instruction happens, and then they have time to go back home and finish off the course, the assignments. But really the delivery itself has always been intensive and in 2 weeks. So that's a challenge, right? Not just switching a course, but switching a course that is intensive into an online format. The other course is called a residency, so it's the part of the program which is laying down the grounds and the structure for all of the interaction that will happen in the program. It's a non-credit course. It's not there to really to add content, but it's there to acclimatize the students to the campus. It's there to make them discover all of their services, support services, library and student services. It's there to make them discover their synchronous and asynchronous tools. It's there to allow them to explore the LMS. It's there to allow them to bond with their cohorts and to bond with their instructors. So it's an extremely important, again, non-credit course that happens simultaneously to the full credit course that lays down the ground for the whole of their program. So we had a real challenge in trying to shift that to online, because that course in itself really is something that didn't lend itself to online, and in fact was often trying to remedy some of the shortcomings of online delivery that happens later on in the programs. So you have this essence there, and I'm trying to be brief because we only have 25 minutes, the essence of the challenge that we'll be facing. So neither courses, and if you go to the last paragraph, neither courses really lend themselves well to online delivery, because both courses, first of all, they were intensive. They had been designed specifically and with care using UDL for face-to-face delivery, and they were also laying down certain crucial elements that are not present in the rest of the program, because that's the only time when the students meet the instructor and meet the other students face-to-face. This was a challenge. So I have a little interactive interlude there for you. So all of us have had to pivot some courses to online delivery during the COVID crisis, but not all courses have been equally difficult to shift to online delivery. So I would encourage you to stop the recording here and jot down just for yourself some notes and some reflection, or if you have someone next to you to engage in a little bit of a conversation, take 10-15 minutes and then come back and we'll follow from there. So has the challenge of shifting to online instruction been the same for every course? And are there essential distinctions which must be made between the types of courses that we've had to shift? So I encourage you to pause. I'm not going to pause. I'm going to carry on straight, assuming that you've done the activity. Just going to have a little drink. So I'll offer you my conclusions in terms of my own reflections with regards to that. Some courses are content heavy and actually poorly designed. That's what we see out there, because they're poorly designed for learning engagement. They're really just content heavy course. Whether they're designed face-to-face or online doesn't really actually make much of a difference. So I think that's the first category of courses that we see out there. They need to be redesigned in any event. In a way, COVID has been a blessing, because really, even when they were offered face-to-face, they were not really taking learner engagement into consideration or using UDL principles. So that's what I categorize as the sort of first category of courses that we've encountered there. Some courses were designed with learner engagement to a degree, but this was clumsily done. And so it required some fine-tuning, both in terms of face-to-face using UDL, and then obviously a different type of redesign when it comes to online delivery. So those are the kind of courses that required a medium effort in terms of redesign and a medium reliance on UDL, but that actually needed to happen face-to-face and online, because really there was only the rudimentary sort of aspects of flexibility and reflection around engagement that was present. So other courses actually were fairly sophisticated in the design and had used UDL extensively, but within the context of a face-to-face delivery. And that's where there was the most friction, I think, because people, having already done all these works, assumed that it was then just a matter of shifting them to another format. Now, what I'm going to assert here is that is a wrong assumption that we made. And that really, when we get to the lesson, I'm going to give you an insight already into some of the lessons. I'm going to argue that really when we apply UDL, we apply it not in a vacuum, but we apply it in context. And therefore, even if we've done a fairly sophisticated design of a course that was face-to-face, When it shifted to online, we pretty much had to go back and redo the work completely. So again, go through the same principle, design thinking, using UDL, but quickly realize that really it's very, very different than the design, even if it's been sophisticated, that has been used face-to-face. And I'm going to argue that here the key is our construct of learner engagement, and that learner engagement has to be contextualized. And that's really we're at the heart now of what I am talking to you in this session. So some important variables, I'm going to spend only a few minutes on this, but recapping all the concepts that I gave you, but just to recap in terms of being able to apply this reflection to other courses or to your own context. Here are some of the crucial variables. Students were new to the program; they had never worked in the institution at all, and certainly not in that program. They were new to online delivery, and the hope was really that these two courses were going to be face-to-face, but actually be the stepping stone towards online delivery, so that we would have had that sort of gestation time to get them familiar with it. De facto, they had no familiarity with the LMS, the synchronous tools, or the asynchronous tools, with the library, with the student services, and none of the tools that were available to you. They had never met their cohorts, and therefore had no opportunity to develop social capital with the rest of their class, so they had no network for support. There was a huge time constraint, as I explained. Really, a 2-week intensive had to be entirely redesigned so that it could be offered online. And we were given a choice by the institution whether we wanted to keep it synchronous for 2 weeks, asynchronous for 2 weeks, or asynchronous and use the entire 8 weeks and respread the workload entirely. And a discussion around course design in UDL is normally carried out in these two courses because I'm the program head and I do so much work around UDL. So we actually introduce the students to the notion of UDL and how UDL is applied in the program. But that's normally done again during those 2 intensive weeks, and it's done in a dialogical form. So it's done face-to-face in classroom discussions with a lot of roundtable discussions. And that obviously was an opportunity we would not have. So these are the crucial variables and the challenges that we had. In terms of the use of UDL in my reflection, I'm going to go through this quite quickly. Obviously, the work around the design is quite wide, and here we only really are exploring and analyzing one dimension of this, of this work, this redesign work, and that's the engagement piece. Why the engagement piece? I'm just going to have a break. Why the engagement piece? Is because I found that in the literature at the moment that looks at COVID and looks at higher education and looks at UDL, we are often focusing on action expression and representation, but we actually are very rarely touching on the complexity of this work with UDL and learner engagement. So I thought this was a great opportunity during this conference to really highlight this. And to really get you to accompany me on this journey and to draw some conclusions from that. Specific issues related to learner engagement. So these are further variables, if you'd like, that we need to consider. Interacting live in a class engagement for 2 weeks in an interactive course is normal, right? You go for if you register for an intensive summer course, you are expected that you are going to be there for 2 full weeks, and obviously you'll be in class all day and you're carrying out basically your 3 credits within those 2 weeks. So you are expecting this high level of engagement face to face. But if we were going to spread this on 8 weeks, this wasn't going to be the same. Could we expect students to be available in the same way at home for 2 weeks? No. Could we expect them to be available even more sporadically, but throughout the 8 weeks? Not either. And that suddenly became very, very different, right? So we had a very different sort of expectation and goal that we had to not just stretch and extend in time, but also to reformat, because we suddenly realized we would never be able to reach the kind of dialogical quality that we normally had during that program. And there was a lot of fear that we would lose some essential elements with the students. We were not going to be able to engage the learners as effectively about learning preferences and impairments when beginning the program, because obviously in face-to-face there are a lot of opportunities for students to offer information in confidence, to have direct access to the accessibility services, to start that triangular conversation between instructor and accessibility services on the campus itself. These opportunities were not going to happen. They were going to have to happen in a different way, but we were suddenly worried about fear of disclosure, possibility that students might not actually be willing to discuss impairment or even learning preferences. The course was now going to be offered over 8 weeks, but we did realize that instead of committing 2 weeks of their time to July, the students were now going to be having demands on their time throughout the summer. Most of these students, it's an MA in educational learning and management, so education leadership and management, and therefore all these students tend to be mid-career teachers. This was their summer break. So we were also very concerned with the fact that we were going from a commitment to 2 weeks of being in campus to suddenly expanding, lightening the load, but at the same time saying, okay, you don't have a summer anymore. We actually are going to be monopolizing your attention, throughout the summer, and this would clash obviously with family and with other commitments, and this was going to be a problem. The other obviously challenge we had is normally this was the great opportunity for cohort bonding, an element of bonding that carries on then for the 2 years of the program. This was not going to, well, at first we thought that this was not going to be able to happen face-to-face. Another challenge was how were we going to be able to gauge the connection between the student's own lived experience and the course content. Normally in the 2 weeks interactive, face-to-face, dialogical, there's ample opportunities for these discussions, and we're able to really intuitively see which topics actually hit the mark when we talk about that effective connection, right, of the multiple ways means of engagement. Where do we hit the mark and we actually have synchronicity between the lived experience of the students and the topics that we're raising in the classes. That was going to be very, very difficult in online interaction, and we saw this as a challenge going in. And then obviously we had COVID-19 itself, which was last summer creating anxiety, stress before the course even began, a certain electrical feverishness, people not exactly sure even of what their lives looked like, what their job was going to look like in September, and what the course would look like. So this was another element. I will add to that although we expected COVID to be detrimental to intakes, we actually had the largest cohort that we've ever had on this master's, jumping from 20 to suddenly 30, which was obviously something celebrated, but at the same time it added another variable really, which we have there, that not only were we doing this shift, but we were doing this shift with a much larger number of students. So let me go through with you quickly at some of the solutions we've explored, and then we'll do a sort of conceptualization looking at the lessons learned. Some of the solutions, and I'm going to be just very matter of fact here and list them, and then in the conceptualization effort, I'm going to give a bit more context and see how these could be worthy of being contemplated in other campuses as you continue to do this, because obviously we're still doing a lot of shifting. So we decided to spread the engagement over a longer period of time and to offer a greater flexibility, obviously, and degree of personal choice with regard to mode of engagement, which meant that we decided that 2 weeks synchronous was not going to become 2 weeks online synchronous, it was going to become 8 week asynchronous and synchronous, and that there would be a lot of options in the way the students would be able to both engage and demonstrate their engagement. And I will go into a little more details now. The multiple ways in which pathways to engagements were, and it's quite a long list because we got very creative there. And this is really, it's that whole dialogical dimensions, right? Spending 8-hour days with the students for 2 weeks, that quality of connection, and we spend a lot of time redesigning something that would be different, but that would together reach the same degree of intensity. So we had forums for asynchronous discussions, we had live sessions for synchronous discussions, we had group chats where we were not part of these group chats, they were happening together for the teams. We had group tasks. These were not assignments, and I stress this, these were just group tasks that every so often, once a week or twice a week, the students had actually had tasks to do as teams, but these were not assessed. Then we had team assignments, we had one-on-one tutorials with all students in the program, and that was between myself and the instructor and program head and the students. Several windows throughout every week throughout the program, the 8 weeks. We had guest speakers. This is again important because it was non-credit, but way of actually developing engagement and that effective quality. Parallel non-credit seminars. By this I mean that although we were looking at both introduction to the program, services, and cohorts, in the non-credit course, and Leading for Social Justice, a critical pedagogy in the credit course, we also had sessions that actually complemented that and offered context to the students as they were coming into the program. So sessions on UDL itself, sessions on theory, a lot of complementary sessions that were not compulsory but very, very well attended. Didn't actually hone in onto the course content itself, but gave that beautiful texture of context as the students were settling into that scholar practitioner sort of role that they would have as graduate students. We optimize the LMS use. I can't go into too much detail today, but we can probably do this in one-on-one discussions. We went much further in terms of creativity as to what we could use the LMS for. So not the regular features, but really went deep with our instructional designers in seeing different tools. And to be honest, tools that were not necessarily used by everyone, but we wanted to hit that playfulness, right? Make the students discover things that they had not used, create curiosity, create diversity from week to week, because we realized this was an 8-week summer now that we were actually monopolizing their attention for. We had a progressive modeling of the potential of all synchronous and asynchronous tools. This was very important. So myself and another instructor were involved in this. And it's really the matter of never asking the students to do something with the tools without having an opportunity to see us actually perform these tasks with the tools. So for all of the tools used in the LMS, and during live synchronous and asynchronous, we actually, whether it's polling, breakout rooms, all of these tools were modeled several times before we actually asked the students to actually carry out these tasks. We supported group work with coaching sessions. We have a team coach, which the institution was great. We were very grateful that they provided samples of what group work would look like. Proactive discussions around what group work difficulties of group works and challenges in a virtual environment. Opportunities for public visibility, in the sense that we opened a lot of these discussions to the greater public. So some of these sessions were not in the LMS, but actually on Zoom and open to others, particularly the guest speaker sessions and things like this, to enable to create a link with community, but also to put a little bit of stress on the students to realize this was actually very much like in a classroom, that there was this degree of osmosis and sort of movement of osmosis with the real world. We ensure the course offered ample activities, not just assessment. This is very important, and we talk a lot about universal design for learning, but here we went really back to backwards design, really this notion that you have your objectives and your assessments, and in the middle, so you set your objectives, you set your assessment, and then you do the backwards design, and you go back and look at all the activities that you actually require before you even get your assessment. I think this was really crucial, because an observation I have looking at the COVID pivot is that in a lot of cases we went straight from teaching, and sometimes just about teaching, just shifting all the material in a sort of flipped classroom, shifting all the material to online, and then just assessing them. So we did a lot of work on actually creating activities that were non-assessed, but that were there as a build-up to eventually an assessment of skills at the end. And then we offered a lot of personalized support. As I've said to you, large commitment, time committed on myself, but I did offer several half-an-hour windows with all of the students in the cohort throughout the summer, and they were all taken up, and there was a lot of participation in that, which is very important, because I think often in UDL we talk about the universal, but we have to realize that in terms of engagement, the universal can only happen if there's also that personalized flavor and that personalized touch that is actually present there. Overall, we had a very, very high satisfaction rating, much higher than I ever expected as a program lead, with well into the 90% satisfaction on both these courses. So great success. And oddly enough, we maybe outdid ourselves, because the students are now into later courses and online, and sometimes they bring up that there isn't just as much richness and creativity as there was in the original setting, and that the other courses are more the mainstream sort of expectations that they would expect in an online course. So we may have gone much further with this experimentation than courses are normally designed for online delivery. I again encourage you to take a short break here and maybe take some time to actually discuss with a friend or a peer, if you're both listening, if you're listening with other people, or just to jot down some notes. Which of these solutions have you tried yourself with regards to engagement? And again, we're only looking at engagement today. There's many other aspects that we could use UDL for in this reflection, but we have to set some clear parameters. Are there any solutions that were not listed here that you've tried with regards to engagement when shifted these courses to online, and what were some of the outcomes that you recorded? So I encourage you to pause, and I will see you very shortly. Just get a little drink before we finish. In terms of conceptualization, this will be my last 5 minutes. It's important that I don't just leave you with anecdotal, but I really sort of draw the broader lessons that I've extracted from this that may help you in other contexts and within your own reflection with UDL and the shift to online, and more generally UDL and online delivery. If we now look at things from a thematic, from a conceptual position, I think what we managed to do here through all the tools and the solution was to create community, and this was very important as part of this UDL reflection on multiple means of engagement. We placed the learner firmly in the driving seat, lots of options, lots of choices, lots of avenues to voice, to express. Never took it for granted that students would just find one way of doing this as satisfactory, and there were a lot of repetitive efforts in different formats to get really to the bottom of their expectations. We address what I call transitional friction, this notion that using UDL is not always easy for students who've never used UDL, and there can be a lot of tension, a lot of friction if students don't actually understand what you're doing. I always take, for example, the illustration example of the multiple means of representation and an instructor actually placing a lot of different articles, different sources on an LMS. That can be very overwhelming for students if they don't actually understand. They don't have to read them all. That really we're asking them to use their judgment and use their preferences and choose what works for them. This is what I call transitional friction. So here too, we address transitional friction, particularly in terms of making them comfortable with choice, comfortable with flexibility, and in really being able to also give just-in-time feedback on what was working for them and what wasn't working for them. We integrated flexibility, and often we say that with UDL, the multiple means of engagement, that we inject flexibility, but I'm going to be very precise here in terms of tempo, in terms of modus operandi, and in terms of format. By this I mean a tempo, how frequently they interacted and engaged, modus operandi, in which way did they engage, lots and lots and lots of different ways for them to show engagement in the course, no expectations for it to happen in one single way. And then lots of flexibility with regards to outcomes. So could use a multitude of tools for action expression, but it links to engagement here in demonstrating that engagement. Didn't necessarily have to be the equivalent of the hand raise being in a forum or an asynchronous forum. It could take all sorts of variation during the week in how they demonstrate that engagement. We integrated windows of personalization. Again, I said this is an important reflection for all UDL scholars, because we often focus too much on the universal, but we have to realize that that reflection on UDL and engagement requires a degree of personalization. And then we acknowledge context, the fact that really UDL, again, is not applying a vacuum, but we were applying all of these choices and that flexibility in a highly stressful context, an exceptional context of a pandemic that had turned all students' lives upside down. So this was at the heart of the exercise, and it wasn't just an ancillary thought. It was very much central to all of the strategies that we were using. So the most important lesson of all, before I leave you, is that this really made me step out of my teacher-centric mode. And as I said at the beginning, often we say that we engage students, but we don't really reflect the degree to which our understanding of engagement is really teacher-centric. It really is engagement as we see it. All of this reflection using UDL in this context forced me to really think outside the box and to choose strategies which were not strategies that I would have liked if I'd been registered in that course, but they were obviously very useful to the students. So a complete ethnographic flip around where I ended, and my team, myself and my team, ended up doing things that we would never do for ourselves, or we would never think of doing, but that we really consciously, proactively injected, wanting to see if they helped, and they did help, and then they became anchored in the course. So a sort of curiosity towards the other with a capital O, right? To be looking at what other people prefer and how other people function in terms of engagement. The last lesson as well is that maybe the COVID-19 crisis has served as an acid test, right? For us, certainly it serves as an acid test. As I said, we now are finding ourselves in a situation where students say, we love the summer, we love that, we're not getting the same with our normal online courses. So it's really both disturbing and really provocative for us to now think, well, what is online delivery and how can we do more of this UDL work with engagement in our regular online courses? Because this flipped made us go to the very bottom of that reflection and to try all the tools and pull it all out, and it was very useful. So I'm going to cut off exactly at past. I've been at it for 30 minutes. You do have some references here. I tried to include 2020. There's a lot of research already coming out, and then you have my details there with which to engage if there's anything else that you want to talk about before, during, or after the conference. I'm really looking forward to the Reconnection conference. So pity will not all be able to be in Dublin this time, but it will happen next time, and I look forward to these conversations during the conference. Thanks you all for listening.